You think cowboys simply suffered from bullet wounds or rattlesnake bites out on the frontier, but they faced a silent psychological killer that destroyed more men than any gunfight at the OK Corral. Here's the thing about the Wild West that sounds completely backwards. Having total freedom and millions of acres of open land will actually drive you insane faster than being locked in a crowded prison cell. Yeah, you heard that right. The frontier is literally everywhere around you, vast and open. But spending even a few months alone in a sodbuster shack makes the human brain panic and start shutting down. The demographic imbalance in the West was about 200 times worse than what a functioning society can handle. In some mining camps, the ratio of men to women was literally 200 to 1. When you live like that, your mind desperately tries to fill the void, leading to a condition heavily documented at the time. Prairie madness. You end up losing more of your humanity than you gained in gold. It's like trying to put out a forest fire with a cup of water. Cowboys and settlers figured this out the hard way during those brutal winters in the Dakotas or the scorching summers in Arizona. Homesteads back then were basically isolated wooden boxes with zero connection to the outside world. A wife wasn't just a romantic partner. She was an essential survival unit. Single men had to choose between working the land until they dropped dead or spending half their day cooking, cleaning, and mending clothes just to stay alive. Most chose the work, thinking they'd figure out the domestic part later. Bad choice. Settlers would watch their sanity dwindle day after day. Desperate men would start talking to their oxen, treating inanimate objects like people, and sinking into a depression so deep it was physically painful. They became violently lonely within months. Their cabins would turn into sties, their hygiene would vanish, and their minds would start playing tricks on them. Some cowboys reported hearing voices in the wind or seeing figures on the horizon that weren't actually there. The smart pioneers quickly learned that loneliness could destroy a homestead faster than a locust swarm or a drought. Stories spread through every trading post about cabins found with the table set for dinner, but the owner hanging from the rafters, dead from despair while surrounded by endless opportunity. These weren't just scary tales. They were warnings. A female companion became more valuable than a vein of silver. Seriously, miners would travel hundreds of miles just to see a woman's dress hanging on a clothesline, because that's exactly how desperate they were. When the psychological pressure got too high, even the most rugged frontiersmen would turn to the only solution available. But here's where the cowboys got creative. They started using a system that would make modern dating apps look completely primitive. After learning that the West was basically a bachelor party that never ended and smelled terrible, men had to get proactive fast. Their first instinct? Look locally. But they couldn't just stand there at the saloon waiting for a woman to walk in, because there weren't any. Smart men turned to the printed word. Newspapers became their lifeline, but not the local rags. Those were useless. They needed reach. They needed the East. Tattered copies of Matrimonial News or The Heart and Hand circulated through bunkhouses until they fell apart. These weren't just newspapers. They were catalogs of human hope. A subscription cost $1, but the contents were priceless. The trick was positioning yourself just right in a text ad, so a woman in Boston or Chicago would leave civilization for a mud hut in Nebraska. It makes sense, right? Here is where it gets interesting, though. Cowboys quickly discovered that using total honesty was like trying to sell a horse with 3 legs. Lonely, smelly, lives in a hole in the ground, wasn't getting any bites. So they developed a marketing routine. polishing their reality thoroughly before any letter-writing attempt. This meant precious time and money spent on photographers. Men who hadn't bathed in weeks would scrub down, put on a rented suit, and pose next to rented furniture to look like prosperous land barons. Then there were the letters. Cowboys became surprisingly good at improvised poetry, creating descriptions of their land that sounded more like the Garden of Eden than a dust bowl. These makeshift profiles could funnel every ounce of potential charm straight into the mailbox. Some men got so good at this they could juggle correspondence with 3 or 4 women at once. But wait, it gets weirder. When the letters weren't enough, desperate cowboys turned to proxies. They'd ask the few married women in the territory to write the letters for them, hoping a female touch would sound more reassuring. They'd soak the paper in whatever scent they could find, or press flowers that survived the drought. The gesture was tiny, maybe a dried violet in an envelope, but every petal counted when you're dying of solitude. The real problem with all these methods? The mail doesn't follow a romantic schedule. Letters could take months to arrive, especially in winter. A courtship could drag on for 2 years without a single face-to-face meeting. Well, clever settlers started combining techniques. They'd set up permanent ads in multiple Eastern papers while also rotating through the catalogs. The most successful suitors treated finding a wife like a military operation. Everyone had specific roles. The local school teacher might correct the grammar, the photographer fix the image, and slacking off on writing back could mean a lifetime alone. And the weird part is, these early methods actually worked pretty well when the stars aligned. Cowboys could convince a woman to travel 2,000 miles based on a few sheets of paper and a grainy tintype. But relying entirely on the mail meant gambling with everyone's lives. Unfortunately, human nature wasn't always cooperative, which forced cowboys to look for more reliable solutions. They needed something that didn't depend on a woman's whim or the speed of the Pony Express, something they could control themselves. Men might have thought they solved their loneliness problem once they got a yes in a letter, but the vetting process? That was a nightmare, wrapped in handwriting and sealed with false hope. Every mail order arrangement carried dozens of risks. And yes, risk is an understatement. We're talking about massive gambles where the stakes were your entire future, sealed with wax. But here is where things got disgusting fast. Truth sitting in a letter didn't just stay the truth for long. The reality would start rotting from the inside out. You see, the women on the other end were often doing the exact same thing the cowboys were. Lying. A 20-year-old beauty might actually be a 45-year-old widow with 6 children and significant debt. A wealthy rancher might turn out to be a drifter squatting on public land. This phenomenon was the 19th century version of catfishing, but with much higher stakes. You commit to marriage, you pay for the train ticket, and you wait at the station. When the person steps off the train, the disappointment hits you harder than a kick from a mule. It creates a toxic situation instantly. Men would turn violent. Women would end up stranded in a lawless town with no money to get back. Then there was the damaged goods problem nobody talks about. These catalogs weren't exactly attracting the debutantes of New York society. They were often the last resort for women who had reputations or health issues or no family support. Your fresh start in the West might come with a hidden history of tuberculosis or a criminal record or a husband who wasn't quite dead yet. One day you're expecting a partner to help build a farm. The next, you're realizing you've imported a whole new set of problems. Makes sense, right? Desperation absorbs risk like a thirsty sponge. Cowboys discovered the hard way that their carefully curated correspondence would turn into a toxic relationship within days, sometimes hours, of the first meeting. The irony was brutal. You could die of loneliness while sharing a 10 by 10 cabin with a person who hates you, creating an atmosphere more poisonous than a rattlesnake den. Well, desperate times called for desperate measures. Cowboys weren't exactly known for giving up easily, especially when their lineage depended on it. They started experimenting, trying anything that might keep their investment from turning into a disaster. Some men tried adding legal contracts to the correspondence, hoping it would filter out the scammers. Others demanded multiple photos from different angles, trying to verify the goods before paying the shipping costs. But these were just temporary fixes for a problem that demanded real solutions. And the weird part is, the answer was literally staring them in the face every time they looked at the broader economy. The solution involved money, systems, and a technique that would unintentionally revolutionize how the West was populated. Cowboys were about to become accidental sociologists, and their next discovery would change everything about frontier marriage forever. Cowboys weren't exactly known for their sociological breakthroughs, but desperate times called for structured measures. When your homestead is failing because you have no partner, and your mail order attempts result in disaster, you get creative fast. Here's where things get interesting. Some clever entrepreneurs figured out that professionalism could actually save the dating market. They started creating highly curated catalogs. Instead of random ads, these were bound booklets, specifically designed to showcase women who had been vetted. The process was simple, but brilliant. Agencies would interview women in the East, check their backgrounds, ensuring they weren't running from the law or carrying infectious diseases. They'd create a layer of bureaucratic protection between the lonely cowboy and the potential scammer. Then they'd send these high-end catalogs to the West. They'd charge a premium, of course. A cowboy might pay $5 for a list of names, which was a week's wages. But it was worth avoiding that sinking feeling of meeting a stranger who looked nothing like her description. Think of it as the world's first premium dating service, invented by people who smelled like horse manure. Cowboys noticed their success rate improved. Instead of the marriage imploding after just a few days, these vetted unions had a fighting chance. The charred barrel of the agency filtered out the worst impurities of the dating pool. It acted like a social filter. The professional layout and the fee frightened away the casual drifters and the unserious women. It slowed down the bacterial growth of fraud that thrived in the free newspaper ads. What makes this even more amazing is that Cowboys accidentally stumbled onto something we still use today. Modern matchmaking services and high-end dating apps use paywalls and verification for similar reasons. That financial barrier changes the quality of the candidates, filtering out impurities. Cowboys weren't trying to be social engineers. They just wanted a wife who wouldn't rob them and leave. The method spread quickly because it actually saved lives and ranches. Word travels fast when you find something that keeps you from marrying a con artist. Successful ranchers started advising their hands to only use the reputable agencies. But even this clever trick had limitations. Vetted catalogs couldn't perform miracles with truly incompatible personalities, and the process used up precious cash. Cowboys needed backup plans when the premium route was too expensive. Then there's something even more surprising that settlers discovered about keeping a marriage fresh. They found that adding certain valuable metals to the deal created almost magical results. While cowboys were busy vetting catalogs, some clever patriarchs discovered something fascinating. Tossing land titles into the negotiation wasn't just bribery, it was accidental genius. Those shiny deeds to 160 acres weren't there for luck. They were there for survival. Here's what happened. Men noticed that offers containing promises of land ownership in the woman's name stayed stable longer. The relationship didn't turn sour as fast. It didn't smell like resentment after 2 weeks of hard labor. Makes sense, right? Well, cowboys didn't know they were dealing with one of society's most powerful binding agents, economic security. Land kills instability. Not some of it, most of it. Modern sociology proves this works because shared assets create a barrier to exit. It essentially destroys the option of leaving before it can multiply. Settlers stumbled onto this centuries before prenuptial agreements were common. They just knew their marriages lasted longer when precious dirt was at the bottom of the deal. But here's the weird part. Some women swore these land-based marriages tasted better too. Cleaner. Less like servitude and more like a partnership. Women would argue over which cowboys offered the best terms. A deed in her own name seemed popular, though nobody could explain why beyond security. Maybe it was pure. Maybe it was just frontier psychology at work. The really smart cowboys hoarded land claims specifically for this water treatment. When cash ran low, they'd keep their land titles ready. Cattle could die, crops could fail, but land, that was life or death. Real treasure meant staying married long enough to raise a generation to work that land. Then there's the practical side. Land deeds were easy to verify. Unlike promises of love or good behavior, which dissolved or rotted, land stayed land. Women could go to the courthouse, check the claim, and know exactly what they were getting. Stability at its finest. Of course, land wasn't perfect. It couldn't fix a relationship that was already completely rotten or abusive. It worked best as prevention, not cure. Smart cowboys learned to put the land offer on the table immediately, not wait until the wife was packing her bags. The land trick spread through the territories faster than gossip about a gold strike. But even land had its limitations when the harvest failed, and the isolation became dangerous. That's when the craftiest pioneers turned to what sounds like pure magic, turning foreign elements into life-saving partners. The process called international migration wasn't new, but cowboys had to get creative with logistics. Bring a woman from Germany or Scandinavia or Ireland. It sounds simple in theory, but absolutely brutal in practice when you're dealing with ocean liners and covered wagons. A rancher in Minnesota might realize that American women from the East Coast were too soft for the climate. So he orders a specific distillation rig. He writes to his church back in Norway. His crew thought he was crazy until they realized this contraption could save their lives during those endless winters. The setup used church networks and family connections, heated over carefully controlled correspondence, positioned to catch every precious drop of human potential fleeing famine in Europe. But here is where it gets interesting and dangerous. These arrangements needed constant attention because one wrong move could start a cultural fire. Settlers had to balance keeping the tradition alive enough to make the bride comfortable, while not letting her feel isolated in a foreign land. Talk about high-stakes cooking. The fuel problem was massive too. Every dollar sent to Europe for a ticket was a dollar that couldn't be used for seed or livestock. Some men got so desperate they sold their furniture, their spare horses, anything to generate the cash for that ticket. The stress must have been absolutely terrible. Then there's the speed issue nobody talks about. These international arrangements produced wives incredibly slowly. We're talking maybe a year or two of waiting if you were lucky. A lonely rancher needed help now, not in 18 months. Smart settlers learned to time their requests perfectly. They'd send the money during the harvest, when they had cash, hoping the wife would arrive by spring. Some communities even took turns sponsoring women, keeping the process running continuously to populate the whole valley. The copper tubing of these networks often came from melted down savings and community chests. Ironic that their hard-earned money literally became their biological lifeline. Settlers discovered that women from hard agricultural backgrounds in Europe worked better than city girls because they conducted labor efficiently and didn't rust in the harsh weather. Of course, international shipping wasn't their only trick. When money ran low or wars in Europe stopped the flow, cowboys had to get even more creative with their survival methods. While catalogs and land deeds were clever solutions, they still faced their biggest nightmare, being surrounded by people, yet completely unable to connect. The most popular backup plan, the widow strategy. Now, this wasn't about being predatory, though that was a nice side effect for some. Cowboys discovered that marrying a local widow, even one with children, actually slowed down the chaos of building a farm from scratch. The children acted like a preservative, keeping the precious family unit stable for longer stretches. Smart, right? But children weren't the only weapon in their arsenal. Some crews swore by the Harvey girls. Fred Harvey set up restaurants along the railroad lines and imported decent, educated women to work as waitresses. It wasn't officially a bridal catalog, but everyone knew what it was. The vinegar of their strict moral code didn't just mask the horrible behavior of the cowboys. It actually fought off the harmful microbes of the lawless towns. Harvey girls were like living filters. Cowboys would clean themselves up, put on ties, and eat with forks just to have a chance. Then there were the really desperate filtering attempts. Picture a cowboy trying to strain a potential wife through a layer of complex lies about his past. Some men used the rescue fantasy, writing to women in prisons or asylums, believing that gratitude would catch the impurities of their relationship. Did it work? Sometimes. Was it pretty gross? Absolutely. The weirdest concoction had to be the proxy marriage. This bizarre legal trick mixed a stand-in groom, a distant bride, and a judge in a hurry. The cowboy wouldn't even be there. He'd be working the herd while someone else said "I do" for him. It tasted awful, a marriage without a wedding, but it was better than dying alone. Of course, not every experiment ended well. Some cowboys tried buying women from darker sources, human traffickers or crimps who kidnapped girls from ports. They thought the force would keep things fresh. What they didn't know was that this lead pipe approach slowly poisoned everyone involved. The ranch would become a prison. The women would fight back, poison the food, or burn the house down while the men slept. The cowboys would get sick, weak, and confused, not understanding why their improved domestic setup was actually killing them. This trial-and-error approach cost lives, but it also led to genuine discoveries. The Wild West was basically a floating laboratory of sociology. Cowboys tested wild theories about human compatibility while fighting for survival on the open prairie. While these makeshift solutions kept many lineages alive, the most innovative pioneers were already working on something far more ambitious. Some community leaders were experimenting with techniques that went way beyond simple matchmaking, methods that could actually transform the demographic landscape itself. They started building towns specifically to attract women, churches, schools, libraries. It sounds boring, but it was the solar still of the frontier. They realized that if you build a bladder of civilization, a schoolhouse, a general store with nice fabric, and hang it in the direct sunlight of the railroad line, women would naturally condense there. It took patience, but it worked even when individual fuel was scarce. The seaweed trick? That was the mail-order bride who arrived and then wrote home to her sisters and cousins. "It's hard here," she'd write, "but I own land." These letters acted like natural filters, absorbing the salt of fear and releasing a stream of cleaner, more hopeful immigrants. And let's not forget the massive ship cannons sitting around, the railroad companies. Experienced developers figured out they could use these metal beasts as heat exchangers for faster population. They ran marketing campaigns through the railroad offices, offering discounted immigrant tickets for women. The massive capital of the railroads held the heat longer, making the whole colonization process more efficient. Who knew corporate monopolies could save lives through demographic purification? And the weird part is, what happened when they reached the coldest, hardest realities of the West? They developed emergency ice-melting techniques. When a woman arrived and hated the husband instead of murder or suicide, which happened a lot, they invented the Western divorce. It was surprisingly sophisticated. In many Western states, divorce laws were incredibly loose compared to the East. It allowed a mismatch to dissolve quickly so both parties could try again. It was a survival mechanism. Fresh snow. Almost pure opportunity, waiting to be melted down again. Some women became serial brides, collecting dowries and moving on, creating a specialized economy of their own. These advanced methods separated the amateur settlers from the true survival experts. While people back east worried about proper Victorian etiquette, seasoned Westerners were mastering the chemistry of human relationships and the physics of supply and demand without even knowing it. They turned their mud huts into laboratories where every experiment could mean the difference between a legacy and a shallow grave. The most successful settlers weren't just good with a lasso. They were brilliant at the logistics of love. They understood that in a land that tries to kill you every day, the only true safety is found in numbers. And if you have to buy those numbers from a catalog, burn a few barrels, or melt some ice to get there, well, that's just the cost of doing business on the edge of the world.